Mabel Pierce stood beside the depot with a bridal trunk at her feet, and no groom willing to claim her. The whole town watched from behind wagon wheels, shop windows, and church hats as the station master read the return letter aloud, the one that said she was too plain, too poor, and too late. Her gloves were patched. Her stomach had been empty since morning. Then a limping cowboy with a blood-dark bandage under his coat rode in for flour, coffee, and nails, expecting only a quick errand before sundown. Dallas Osborne saw the tears Mabel refused to shed, heard a man laugh at her name, and turned his horse toward the crowd instead of the mercantile. Before we open the door to this dusty town, tell me your country in the comments. Subscribe if you love Western romances about public shame, unexpected rescue, and hearts that finally come home. By the time the noon train screamed away from Mercy Crossing, Mabel Pierce had become the thing the town would talk about until Sunday. She stood on the platform in a brown traveling dress gone gray with dust, one hand resting on a battered bridal trunk, the other closed around a wilted bunch of white daisies she had bought from a little girl 2 towns back. The flowers had been meant for the man who promised to meet her. The trunk had been packed for a house she had never seen. The hope in her heart had been stitched together from 6 letters, each one signed by Jonah Bell, widower, landowner, God-fearing man in need of a wife. But Jonah Bell was not at the station. His brother was. Luther Bell stood in his town coat with a silver watch chain stretched across his round belly, and a sneer that seemed practiced in mirrors. He had waited until the passengers stepped down, until the trainmen tossed trunks and flour sacks onto the platform, until half of Mercy Crossing gathered to watch the arrival of the mail-order bride. Then he unfolded Jonah's last letter and read it loud enough for the horses at the hitching rail to hear. "My brother Jonah regrets the misunderstanding," Luther said, letting the paper tremble for effect. He did not expect Miss Pierce to arrive after receiving no final confirmation. His household situation has changed. He has decided not to marry. Mabel felt the first blow in her stomach. Then Luther lowered the letter and added, "He also says he cannot take responsibility for a woman who arrives with no funds, no family, and no useful beauty to recommend her." A few men laughed, not many, not loud, but enough. The sound went through Mabel like a needle through thin cloth. The station master shifted from one foot to the other. The telegraph boy looked down. A woman in a feathered church hat whispered behind her glove. Someone muttered that Eastern women always came west expecting miracles. Someone else said Jonah Bell had been wise to reconsider. Mabel did not move. If she moved, she feared she might fall apart in pieces and Mercy Crossing would sweep her off the platform like straw. She had spent every dollar reaching that town. She had sold her mother's blue teapot, her winter shawl, and the little gold cross that had hung at her throat since childhood. She had believed Jonah's letters because they sounded steady. He had written of a White House beside a cottonwood, of 2 lonely children needing a kind hand, of a man tired of eating cold suppers and speaking to empty rooms. He had never once written that she was beautiful. That was one reason she trusted him. Now his brother folded the letter, as if putting away a finished chore. "The afternoon train east will come tomorrow," Luther said, "assuming you can afford passage." Mabel looked toward the ticket window. The station master looked away. She had 32 cents in the pocket of her dress. The town seemed to know it before she spoke. Luther stepped closer. "There's a charitable room behind the church for women in unfortunate situations. Reverend Pike might allow you one night, if you ask properly." Mabel's fingers tightened around the daisies until one stem snapped. Ask properly. She had crossed nearly half the country to marry a stranger, because there had been no work left in Ohio, no family left alive, and no door left open that did not require begging. She had come west not to be safe, but to belong somewhere by honest agreement. Now she was being offered pity with witnesses. "I will not trouble the Reverend," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. Luther's smile thinned. "Then where will you go?" Mabel had no answer. That was when a horse came in slow from the south road, its hooves striking the packed dust with the uneven rhythm of a tired animal carrying a tired man. The rider wore a black hat, bleached brown at the crown, a trail coat dark from weather, and one sleeve stiff with dried blood. He sat tall, despite the way his left shoulder leaned inward, as if pain had lodged under his ribs and settled there for good. Dallas Osborne had ridden 15 miles for supplies, and every mile had reminded him that he was not healed. 3 weeks earlier, a steer had broken through a storm fence and dragged a length of barbed wire across his thigh. When he tried to turn it, the wound should have kept him at the ranch, but winter was leaning close over the prairie, and a man alone could not let an empty pantry or a cracked roof wait for mercy. His ranch, the Ash Hollow place, lay beyond the ridge where the grass turned silver at dusk. It had once held noise, hands, cattle, and laughter. Now it held one wounded cowboy, a boy he had taken in after a fever wagon lost both parents, and a herd too thin to brag about. Dallas wanted flour, salt pork, coffee, lamp oil, nails, and nothing more from Mercy Crossing. He did not want a crowd. He did not want trouble. He especially did not want to hear Luther Bell's voice. But when Dallas rode past the depot, he saw the woman standing on the platform with a trunk beside her, and shame placed around her like a public chain. He saw the snapped flowers in her hand. He saw Luther's smile, and he saw the way the townspeople watched her, not as if she were a person, but as if she were an unfortunate story that had arrived for their entertainment. Dallas reined in. His horse blew hard through its nose. Luther looked over and stiffened. "Osborne, didn't expect you in town. Didn't come for you," Dallas said. His voice had a low rasp, the kind that made conversations shorter. Luther glanced at the stain on Dallas's coat. "You look half dead, still enough alive to hear a coward read a private letter to a crowd." The laughter died. Mabel looked at the rider for the first time. His face was lean, browned by weather, with a scar cutting pale through the edge of his beard. His eyes were not soft. Nothing about him looked easy. But he was looking at Luther Bell with a steadiness that made the air feel less cruel. Luther tucked the letter into his coat. "This is family business, not yours," Dallas said. "And not family if your brother cast her off by paper." A woman near the baggage cart whispered, "He ought not interfere." Dallas heard her. His jaw tightened, but he did not turn. He dismounted slowly, one hand pressing his side when his boots hit the earth. Mabel noticed the brief flash of pain across his face. He hid it quick, but not before she saw it. He walked to the platform steps and stalked below her, not close enough to frighten, not far enough to seem indifferent. "Ma'am," he said, removing his hat. "Do you have somewhere safe to go?" Mabel swallowed. Pride rose in her. "Wounded. I can manage." "That wasn't my question." The town held its breath. She looked at the trunk, at the tracks, at the sky, wide and pitiless over Mercy Crossing. "No," she said. Dallas nodded once, as if she had told him the time of day. Luther gave a dry laugh. "Careful, Osborne. Taking in stray women might give folks ideas." Dallas turned his head. "Folks have ideas because they lack work." A few men looked down at their booths. Luther's face reddened. "You cannot simply haul off Jonah's intended." She stopped being Jonah's intended the minute he left her standing hungry at a depot. Mabel flinched at the word hungry. She had not said it. Somehow the cowboy knew. Dallas looked back at her. "I've got a wagon at the Mercantile once I load it. My place is 15 miles out. There's a roof, a stove, and work if you want it. There's also a boy who needs supper more regular than I've been giving him since I got hurt. I won't ask anything you don't offer. I won't touch what isn't mine. You can stay until you choose otherwise." It was not a proposal. It was not romance. It was not rescue dressed in pretty words. It was a door. Mabel felt the whole town waiting for her to refuse it. because refusing would be proper and accepting would be talked about. But propriety had not bought her a ticket east. It had not defended her name. It had not silenced Luther Bell. She lifted her chin. I can cook, she said. I can mend. I can keep accounts. I can work for my room. Dallas's gaze moved over her face, not measuring beauty, but hearing every word. Then fetch your trunk, Miss Pierce. Luther stepped forward. You'll regret this. Dallas put his hat back on. Likely. I regret most things after dealing with Bells. Mabel bent for the trunk handle, but Dallas reached it first. Pain took him when he lifted it. His mouth went white around the edges. You're hurt, she said. So is your pride. He answered quietly. We'll carry both slow and in front of the town that had watched her be unwanted. Mabel Pierce walked down from the depot beside a wounded cowboy who had come only for supplies and was leaving with a bride no one had claimed. The mercantile smelled of coffee beans, saddle soap, dried apples, and old wood warmed by a potbelly stove. Mabel stood just inside the door, while Dallas Osborne gave his order to Mr. Whitcomb, the storekeeper, who kept glancing at her as if she were an extra item on the list. Flour, 20 pounds, Dallas said. Cornmeal, 10. Coffee, salt, beans, lamp oil, nails, thread, 2 pans of glass, if you've got them. And that blue spool there. Mabel looked at the blue thread. Dallas did not look at her when he added, and a bolt of plain muslin. Mr. Whitcomb set his pencil down. Muslin, cloth, Dallas said. You sell it. I know what it is. Then wrap it. Mabel understood at once. Her cuffs were frayed. The hem of her traveling dress bore a stain from train soot. Dallas had noticed and found a way not to say so. She stepped forward. I can pay for my own cloth when I earn wages. Dallas gave her a sidelong glance. Then consider it advance wages. The storekeeper cleared his throat. There's talk already. Dallas counted coins on the counter with his right hand. Talk weighs less than flour. Mr. Whitcomb's mouth shut. Mabel had not eaten since dawn. She told herself she could wait. She had learned to wait through hunger during the winter after her father died, when bread had been counted by the slice and tea leaves used twice. But the mercantile kept a jar of hard candies near the register, and a tray of biscuits cooling by the stove, and the smell made her stomach cramp. Dallas heard it. She knew because his counting paused. Without a word, he picked up 2 biscuits from the tray, laid a coin beside the register, and handed one to her, wrapped in a clean scrap of paper. I'm not charity, she said too quickly. No, he said. You're a woman who missed dinner because a coward failed to meet a train. She looked down at the biscuit. Steam rose from its split side. There were moments when pride was a fine coat, and moments when it became a freezing blanket. Mabel took the biscuit. Thank you, she said. Dallas nodded and took his own, though he barely ate. Pain had put sweat along his temple. He leaned against the counter when he thought no one saw. Mabel saw. When the wagon was loaded, the sky had begun to change. Clouds gathered in the west, low and bruised, with a smell of snow beneath the dust. The town bell rang once from the church steeple, and Mabel looked toward it. A woman in a gray shawl stood on the church steps with Reverend Pike at her side. Both stared at Mabel. The Reverend's face held the sorrowful disapproval of a man who enjoyed calling it concern. Dallas followed her gaze. You know them? No, you're lucky. A small smile almost reached her lips, then faded when Luther Bell emerged from the livery with 2 men. One was tall and narrow, with a gambler's mustache. The other wore a ranch coat too fine for honest work. Luther pointed toward Mabel. Dallas' hand moved near his belt. Mabel noticed the gun there. She also noticed he did not draw it. Mr. Osborne, she said. Dallas, he replied, still watching the men. I do not want blood spilled over me. That makes 2 of us. Luther crossed the street. One last word, Miss Pierce. Dallas stepped slightly in front of her. Mabel surprised herself by moving around him. The town had seen her abandon. It could see her answer. What is it, Mr. Bell? Luther's smile returned, but not as confidently. You should know the Osborne place is no fit shelter. burned once, mortgaged twice. He lives with a half-wild orphan and cattle that won't survive a hard winter. If you thought my brother's home beneath your hopes, wait until you see Ash Hollow. I did not see your brother's home at all, Mabel said. He lacked the courage to open its door. One of the liverymen snorted. Luther's smile vanished. Dallas looked at Mabel as if he had just learned something important. Luther leaned closer. A woman alone should be careful who she insults. Mabel's fingers tightened around the biscuit paper in her pocket. Before fear could steal her voice, Dallas spoke behind her. She isn't alone. 3 words, plain as fence posts. The street went still. Luther looked from Dallas to Mabel and back again. You'll bring ruin on yourself for a woman you found an hour ago. Dallas' face hardened. Ruin knows the road to my place. It doesn't need your directions. He helped Mabel onto the wagon bench with a carefulness that cost him. Then he climbed up beside her, gathered the reins, and turned the team toward the north road. Mabel kept her eyes forward as Mercy Crossing slid past. The barbershop pole, the church windows, the schoolyard with its bare-limbed trees, the saloon doors swinging, though it was barely afternoon. She felt every stare, some curious, some condemning, some pitying. None followed once the town fell behind them. The prairie opened wide. For a long while, neither of them spoke. The wagon wheels creaked, harness chains clicked. The wind moved over the grass with the dry whisper of skirts. Mabel held the daisies in her lap. Only 2 blooms remained unbroken. Dallas glanced at them once. You can toss those if you want. I bought them for a welcome. Fen, keep them. A bad welcome doesn't ruin flowers. She looked at him then. His profile was severe beneath the brim of his hat. The bruise of pain had settled around his mouth. Your wound is bleeding again, she said. It does that when people irritate me. I know how to clean and bind a wound. He gave her a long look. Of course you do. My father was a doctor for 30 years. I assisted him after my mother passed. Dallas looked at her with new attention. Why didn't you say that in town? No one asked what I was useful for. They only asked why I was unwanted. The reins shifted in his hand. Then he said quietly, that was their shame, not yours. Mabel looked away before the words could soften her too much. The first snow began just before they reached the ridge. Not heavy yet, only small white flecks spinning in the wind. Dallas pulled his coat tighter, but Mabel saw him shiver. You should let me bind that wound when we arrive. I've kept it bound. You have kept cloth over it. That is not the same. He gave her a long look. You always talk straight. I have little talent for charming lies. Good, he said. This house has had enough lies in it. She wondered what he meant, but did not ask. Ash Hollow appeared in the lowering light like a memory that has survived fire, but not forgotten it. A weathered house stood beyond a line of cottonwoods, one side newly patched, the other still bearing smoke stains under the eaves. A barn lean but hell. A corral fence had been repaired in sections with mismatched rails. Near the porch, a boy of about 9 stood holding a bucket, his coat too large and his face too weary. Dallas slowed the wagon. That's Tommy Vale, he said. He's been with me since spring. The boy stared at Mabel. She lifted a hand. Tommy did not wave back. Dallas drew the team to a stop. Tommy, this is Miss Mabel Pierce. She'll be staying a while and helping with the house. The boy's eyes narrowed. Is she your wife? No. Is she leaving? Mabel felt the question enter her like cold air. Children knew how to strike the center of things because they had not yet learned to speak around pain. Dallas answered before she could. Not tonight. Tommy looked at Mabel again, then at the trunk. People always got trunks when they leave. Mabel stepped down from the wagon without waiting for Dallas's. Then, it is fortunate I am bringing mine in instead of taking it out. The boy considered that. Dallas hid a wince as he climbed down. The snow thickened. Inside, the house smelled of ashes, leather, and cold iron. The kitchen stove held only embers. Dishes sat in a pan. A quilt hung over one broken window. Mabel saw neglect, but not laziness. There was the kind of disorder that came when pain, loneliness, and too much work outnumbered a person. She set the daisies in a chipped cup by the sink. Then she rolled up her sleeves. "Where are your clean rags, Dallas?" He stood in the doorway, hat in hand, watching her as if her voice had changed the room. "Bottom drawer," he said. "And hot water. Pump outside," Tommy spoke up. I can fetch it." Mabel looked at the boy. "Then I can start supper after." His guarded face shifted. "You cook? When there's food." Dallas looked from one to the other. Something weary in him eased, but only for a moment. Then his hand pressed to his side again. Mabel pointed to a chair. "Sit down before you fall down." Dallas Osborne, who had faced Luther Bell in the street without blinking, looked as if he might object. Then he sat. By morning, snow lay thin over Ash Hollow, brightening every fence rail and softening the old burn scars on the house. Mabel woke before dawn in a small room off the kitchen with her trunk against the wall and an extra quilt over her feet. For a few breaths, she did not know where she was. Then she heard wind moving under the eaves, a horse stamping outside, and a boy coughing in the next room. She remembered. Mercy Crossing, the depot, Luther Bell's letter, Dallas Osborne's hand lifting her trunk. Despite his wound, she sat up and touched her own cheek, surprised to find it dry. There had been no tears in the night. Exhaustion had taken her first. The kitchen was cold, but not hopeless. Mabel coaxed the stove alive with kindling from the box, pumped water into a kettle, and searched the cupboards. Beans, cornmeal, coffee, salt pork wrapped in paper, a jar of peaches put up by someone who had once cared for this house. She wondered who. By the time Dallas came in from the barn, pale and stiff, coffee was boiling and corn cakes browned in the skillet. Tommy sat at the table, pretending not to be hungry while watching every movement of her hands. Dallas stopped just inside the door. Mabel turned. "You have been doing chores with a wound that should have kept you in bed. Cows don't respect injuries. Then cows are as foolish as men." Tommy's mouth twitched. Dallas noticed and looked almost offended. Mabel set plates on the table. "Eat first, then I will change the dressing." Dallas removed his hat slowly. "You giving orders now? I am earning my room." He held her gaze a moment, then washed at the basin. The meal was plain, but hunger made it fine. Tommy ate quickly, then slowed when he realized there would be enough. That small change told Mabel more about the house than any confession could have. After breakfast, she made Dallas sit by the stove and unbutton his shirt. He did it with reluctance, turning his face toward the window as though the cottonwood trees might be less embarrassing witnesses. The wound crossed his left side under the ribs, an ugly tear where wire had bitten deep. The skin around it was red, the old bandage stiff. Mabel drew a breath through her nose. "That bad?" he asked. "It's not good. I've had worse." "And did you also neglect those?" His mouth tightened. "Mostly." She cleaned the wound with warm water and carbolic from a small bottle she found in a cupboard. He flinched once, then went still, gripping the chair arm hard enough to whiten his knuckles. "You can curse," she said. "Not in front of you. I have heard cursing, not mine." The answer was so solemn that she paused. Then she continued. "Tommy watched from the doorway, pretending to whittle a stick. He got hurt because of my calf." Dallas looked over. "It was not your calf. I left the gate loose. You're a 9. I know how gates work." Mabel tied the fresh bandage carefully. "A loose gate is a mistake. Letting a wound fester because you are stubborn is a choice." Tommy looked at Dallas with interest. "She called you stubborn. I hurt. You going to fire her?" "No." Mabel pinned the cloth in place. "Good. I have not finished improving the kitchen." That day began the quiet work by which strangers stopped being strangers. Mabel scrubbed the kitchen shelves and washed every dish. She mended Tommy's coat where the lining had torn. She cut the blue thread Dallas had bought, and used it to stitch a small patch inside his sleeve where the fabric had split. She found the accounts in a tin box under a flour sack and discovered the ranch was not merely poor, but pressed close to losing ground. Dallas owed money to Silas Greer, a rival rancher with a reputation like a rattlesnake's shadow. The mortgage note had been extended twice. Payment was due before Christmas. Mabel closed the tin quietly when Dallas entered. "You found it," he said. "I was looking for needles and found trouble. Trouble rarely hides well." He leaned against the doorframe. The clean bandage made him stand straighter, though pain still colored him. "Greer wants the north pasture. He's wanted it since my father died. Can you pay?" "Not if winter comes hard." She looked toward the window where Tommy carried feed through the snow. "Does the boy know?" "He knows enough to worry." Mabel understood that. Children in struggling houses always knew. They counted potatoes, measured voices, and learned the sound of adults pretending. "You said this house had enough lies in it," she said. Dallas' face closed. For a moment she thought he would refuse the question. Then he looked at the stove. "My brother Caleb lived here with his wife. Their boy died in the first fire. Not Tommy, another child. After that, Caleb drank, gambled, borrowed. He signed notes in my name while I was away driving cattle. By the time I came back, the house had burned a second time, and Caleb was gone west with what money he could carry." Mabel stood very still. "People in town say I lost the money. Say I burned the place for insurance that never came. Say a lot. Did you tell them the truth?" He gave a faint, bitter smile. "Truth needs listeners." Mabel thought of the depot platform, of Jonah Bell's letter read aloud, of the people who had preferred spectacle over mercy. "Yes, she said, "it does." The days that followed were not romantic in the way dime novels promised. There were no moonlit speeches or sudden embraces by the well. There were chores. There was smoke in the eyes when damp wood refused to catch. There were cracked hands, muddy boots, and coffee gone cold because a calf bawled from a ditch. There was Dallas trying to lift more than he should, and Mabel taking things from his hands before he tore the wound open again. There was Tommy. He did not trust her quickly. He had lost too much to give his heart away because a woman made corn cakes. He tested her with silence, then with questions. "Did your groom hate you?" Mabel nearly dropped a plate. Dallas looked up sharply from sharpening a knife. Tommy flushed. "I just wondered." Mabel dried the plate and set it on the shelf. "I think he was afraid of being disappointed. So he chose to disappoint me first." Tommy considered this. "That's stupid." "Yes," Mabel said. "It is." Dallas lowered his head, but she saw the corner of his mouth move. Another evening, Tommy brought her a torn school primer and asked if she could read the story about a fox. She read it by lamplight while Dallas sat near the stove, mending a harness strap with slow, clumsy fingers. When Tommy fell asleep at the table, Dallas lifted him carefully and carried him to bed. Mabel watched the way the boy's arms circled Dallas's neck, even in sleep. "You are good with him," she said when Dallas returned. He shook his head. "I'm all he has. That does not make a man gentle. It only gives him reason to be." He stood beside the table, his eyes on the lamp flame. "My wife left before I ever had one," he said. Mabel looked up. He seemed surprised by his own words. "I mean, I was engaged once. Sarah Whitcomb, storekeepers, nice. She didn't care for ranch winters or debt or a man who could not promise satin curtains. She married a banker in Abilene. Folks turned it into proof I'm hard to stay with. And are you?" He looked at her then. "My bay." The wind pressed against the windows. Somewhere in the barn, a horse shifted. Mabel folded Tommy's primer closed. "I do not find staying easy, Dallas. I find leaving harder." His expression changed, not soft enough to be named hope, but near it. The next morning he brought a plank from the barn and fixed the broken shelf in her room. He said nothing about it. She found it after breakfast, sanded smooth, sturdy enough to hold her mother's Bible, and the chipped cup with the daisies now dried at the stems. That was the first gift she let herself keep. The first real storm came 3 days before Sunday, pushing down from the north with sleet in its teeth. Dallas rode out before dawn to check the far cattle. Though Mabel told him the sky looked mean, and his wound was not ready for saddle work, he only said, "Mean skies don't wait for healed men." By noon, the wind had grown sharp enough to drive snow under the door. Mabel and Tommy hauled wood to the porch, covered the water barrel, and brought the hens into a crate near the washroom. She kept looking toward the north pasture, where the land rose and disappeared behind a curtain of white. "He knows the way," Tommy said, but his voice was too tight. "Yes," Mabel said, "and knowing the way helps a man return." She made stew because stew could wait without spoiling. She kept coffee hot. She mended because hands needed purpose when the heart had none. Dallas came back near dusk, bent over the saddle, his hat rim frozen, his coat white along the shoulders. Mabel ran onto the porch before the horse stopped. "You foolish man," she said, and caught his arm when he swayed. He tried to smile. Cows objected to dying. Inside, Tommy took the horse. Mabel got Dallas into the kitchen, stripped off his wet coat, and found the bandage soaked red. Again, fear rose in her so quickly, she nearly scolded him with it. Instead, she said, "Sir." This time he obeyed without argument. As she worked, he watched her face. "You're angry," he said. "I'm occupied. You're angry." She pressed clean cloth to the wound. "You could have taken Tommy's pony and gone around the lower draw. You could have waited until the storm broke. You could have asked for help before losing enough blood to frighten a stone wall. I've worked alone a long time. I am aware. The habit is trying to kill you." His eyes held hers. No one had spoken to him as if his life were something worth guarding. Mabel saw that realization come to him, slowly, painfully, like warmth returning to frozen hands. A knock struck the front door. Tommy opened it before Mabel could stop him. Reverend Pike stood in the storm with Mrs. Pike behind him, both wrapped in black wool and righteous concern. Beside them was Luther Bell, snow melting on the shoulders of his fine coat. Dallas cursed under his breath, then remembered Mabel and stopped halfway. Reverend Pike stepped in without waiting. "Mr. Osborne, we have come out of Christian duty." Dallas looked at Luther. Strange company for it. Mrs. Pike's eyes moved over Dallas' Mabel's roll sleeves, the basin of bloody water, and Tommy standing barefoot near the stove. "This is precisely the appearance we feared," she said. Mabel straightened. "He is injured. A woman's reputation is also a wound," Reverend Pike said. "One not so easily bound." Dallas started to rise. Mabel put a firm hand on his shoulder. "Do not tear that open for fools." The room went silent. Luther smiled. Reverend Pike's brows rose. "Miss Pierce, your situation in this house has caused distress among decent families. My abandonment on a public platform caused none. That was unfortunate. This is improper." Dallas spoke, voice dangerous. "Get out." The Reverend lifted a hand. "We offer a solution. Mrs. Pike will take Miss Pierce into the church room until the eastbound train can be arranged. Mr. Bell has agreed to contribute half the fare in exchange for a written statement that no promise remains between her and his brother." Mabel stared at Luther. "There is no promise. Your brother broke it. Then write it," Luther said, "and include that you came west under mistaken expectations, not by deception." There it was. Not charity. Protection for the Bell name. Dallas' hand closed on the chair arm. Mabel's voice cooled. "Jonah Bell wrote 6 letters asking me to marry him. I have them in my trunk." Luther's expression flickered. Reverend Pike turned. "Mr. Bell, she exaggerates," Luther said. "I do not," Mabel answered. "And one letter mentions the money I sent for the land patent search he claimed was needed before the wedding." Dallas looked at her sharply. Luther's face hardened. "That money was a voluntary gift." "It was $12, Mabel said. "Nearly all I had." Dallas stood. This time Mabel could not stop him. You took her money too, he said. Luther stepped back. My brother handled that correspondence. Your brother is in Denver buying horses with a widow's savings, from what I hear, Dallas said. Or was it not enough to rob Miss Pierce alone? The Reverend looked startled. Denver? Luther snapped. You have no proof. Dallas moved one step closer. Blood showed fresh through his bandage. I've got ears. Men in saloons talk when they think wounded cowboys are drunk enough not to remember. Mabel felt the room tilt. Jonah Bell had not merely changed his mind. He had taken from her, arranged her public rejection, and left his brother to shame her into silence. Mrs. Pike's face softened for the first time, but Reverend Pike only stiffened, as if facts were troublesome when they interrupted judgment. Luther pointed at Mabel. Careful, Miss Pierce. A woman with no people should not make enemies of men with standing. Mabel lifted her chin. I had no people yesterday, she said. Today I am standing in a house where I have been fed, sheltered, and spoken to with respect. That is more standing than your family has shown. The words landed clean. Dallas looked at her with something fierce and quiet in his eyes. Luther left first, dragging the Reverend's purpose with him. Reverend Pike muttered that Sunday service would address moral confusion in the community. Mrs. Pike hesitated at the door. Miss Pierce, she said softly, you might still come to the church room. Mabel looked at the little kitchen, the stew pot, Tommy's primer, Dallas bleeding because he had stood for her before he could stand straight for himself. No, she said. I have work here. When the door closed, the storm seemed louder. Tommy let out a breath. Are they going to take you? Dallas answered before Mabel could. No. The boy looked at her. You sure? Mabel knelt so their eyes were level. I am sure I do not want to leave tonight. That and the same as sure forever. She touched the patched sleeve of his coat. No, but forever is built one honest night at a time. Tommy nodded as if storing the sentence away for later use. After he went to bed, Mabel found Dallas outside on the porch. Despite the cold, he had pulled on his coat and was looking toward the black line of pasture beyond the lantern glow. You should be inside, she said. So should you. She stepped beside him. Snow blew across the yard in silver streaks. I did not know about the money, he said. I was ashamed. Why? Because I wanted to believe someone wanted me enough to plan a life. Wanting can make a woman foolish. Dallas' face turned toward her. Wanting makes every soul foolish. The wind moved between them. She looked at his bandaged side. You risked yourself in there? I stood up, with a wound open. Some things are worth bleeding over. Her throat tightened. My name should not cost you blood. He was quiet for so long. She thought he would not answer. Then he said, Mabel Pierce. Your name deserved defending before I knew it. Now I know it better. The words warmed her and frightened her at once. Far off, a cow bawled in the storm. The sound snapped Dallas back to the world. He straightened, winced, and reached for his hat. No, Mabel said. That's the lower pen. You cannot go. If the fence breaks, we lose 6 head. If we lose 6, Greer takes the north pasture. If Greer takes the pasture, this place dies. Mabel looked into the storm, then back at him. Then I go with you. No, Ice. You don't know the land. I know how to hold a lantern and follow a stubborn man. His eyes flashed. This isn't pride. Neither is this. For a moment, the storm, the debt, the town, and all their separate wounds stood between them. Then Dallas took an extra coat from the peg and held it out to her. Button it tight, he said. The lower pen lay beyond the barn, down a slope slick with ice and half hidden by snow. The lantern in Mabel's hand fought the wind. Dallas moved ahead with a coil of rope over one shoulder, bent against pain he refused to admit. The world had shrunk to the circle of yellow light, the dark shapes of cattle, and the crack of wood where the fence had given way. A young heifer had pushed through the broken rails and tangled herself near the creek bed. 2 more cattle pressed toward the gap, bawling into the storm. Dallas handed Mabel the lantern. Stay by the post. She did not argue because the heifer kicked wild when he approached. He spoke low to the animal, voice nearly lost in the wind. Mabel had never heard that tone from him before. Not soft exactly, but patient, worn smooth by use. Easy, girl, easy now. Nobody's taking more from this place tonight. Mabel held the light steady. The rope went over. The heifer fought. Dallas pulled and slipped, catching himself hard against the fence. Mabel saw his face twist. She set the lantern on a stump and climbed down. "I told you to stay," he snapped. "And I heard you." She took hold of the rope beside him. Together, they worked the animal free, inch by inch. Snow soaked her skirt. Mud sucked at her boots. Her hands burned through her gloves. When the heifer finally staggered back through the gap, Dallas shoved a rail into place, and Mabel drove a loose stake down with a stone until her arms shook. They saved the pen, but when they reached the barn, Dallas nearly fell. Mabel got under his arm. He was heavier than she expected, all muscle and stubbornness and fevered heat. By the time she brought him inside, his skin burned beneath her hand. Tommy woke and found them in the kitchen. His eyes widened. "Is he dying?" "No," Mabel said, more firmly than she felt. "He is going to bed," Dallas tried to protest. The protest failed before it became words. For 2 days, fever took him. The storm knocked us hollow away from town. Snow buried the road. The pump froze twice. Mabel kept the fire burning, boiled water, changed bandages, and sat beside Dallas through nights. When he muttered names she did not know. Caleb, Father, Sarah, and once so faint she almost believed she imagined it, Mabel. Tommy helped as much as a boy could. He brought wood until his hands cracked, then hid them so Mabel would not stop him. She found the cracks anyway and rubbed them with salve. "You think he'll leave too?" Tommy asked one night while Dallas slept. "Dallas, everybody does somehow. My ma died. Pa died," the wagon man said. "He'd take me to my aunt, but she was gone." Dallas said I could stay. Then he got hurt. People get hurt and leave. Mabel looked at the boy, at his 2 old eyes in a child's face. "I cannot promise you no one will ever leave," she said. "That would be a lie. But I can promise that tonight, while I have strength in my body, I am here." Tommy leaned against her side then, not fully, just enough for trust to begin. On the 3rd morning, the fever broke. Dallas opened his eyes to pale sunlight and Mabel asleep in the chair beside his bed, her head tilted against the wall, one hand still resting near the basin. Tommy slept on the rug with a blanket around his shoulders, as if guarding the door. Dallas did not move for a long while. He had known loneliness as weather. He had worn it like winter, expected it, worked through it. But this was something else. A woman who owed him nothing had fought a storm, bound his wound, fed his boy, and stayed awake through his fever. Not because a vow forced her, not because a town watched, because he chose it. Mabel woke when he tried to sit up. "Don't," she said at once. He obeyed. A faint smile touched her tired face. "That might be the first sensible thing you have done since I arrived." His voice came rough. "You saved my life. I kept a wound clean. Your own body did the rest." "You saved my life," he repeated. She looked away, suddenly busy with the basin. "You saved my dignity first." Dallas washed her hands. They were reddened from work. One knuckle was cut from the fence. He remembered the sound of Luther Bell reading that letter aloud. He remembered the town laughing. He remembered thinking, there stands a woman being buried while still breathing. Now she moved around his room as if she had always belonged to its light. "I need to go to town," he said. She turned so fast her skirt brushed the chair. "You need to stay in bed." "Not today. When the road clears." "Why?" "To answer Bell." Fear crossed her face before pride covered it. "No, Mabel, no. You are not going into town to fight over me. I'm not going to fight." "You say that as if fights asked permission." He managed a weak smile. "Some do." She came closer. "Dallas, Luther Bell wants you angry. Reverend Pike wants me ashamed. Silas Greer wants this ranch weak. If you ride in half-heeled and make a scene, they all get what they want." He studied her. "Then what do you want?" The question caught her. She could have said justice. She could have said the $12 returned. She could have said a ticket east, though the thought now felt like stepping into an empty room. Instead, she said, I want not to be hidden. Dallas' eyes changed. Mabel pressed her lips together, then let the truth come. If I stay here quietly, they will say you took advantage of me. If I leave, they will say I proved their judgment right. If I go to church and sit alone, they will stare until I wish the ground would swallow me. I am tired of men making choices and calling my silence agreement. Dallas was quiet. Then he said, Sunday. What? We go Sunday, together. Through the front doors. You bring Jonah's letters. I'll bring Greer's note and what I know about Belle. We won't start with fists. We'll start with truth. Mabel's heart thudded. Reverend Pike will not like it. Then he can preach around it. And if Luther denies everything, he will. And if the town still laughs. Dallas reached for her hand and stopped just short, leaving the choice to her. Mabel looked at his open palm. Slowly, she placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers with careful strength. Then I'll stand beside you until they finish, he said. And when they are done, you'll still be standing. Sunday came cold and bright. By then, Dallas could walk without leaning, though Mabel knew each step hurt. Tommy polished his boots with stove blacking until they shone in patches. Mabel wore the brown dress she had arrived in, but she had washed it, pressed it, and mended the cuffs with blue thread, the same blue Dallas had bought without naming her need. Before they left, she opened her trunk and took out Jonah Bell's letters tied with faded ribbon. At the bottom of the trunk lay the white daisies, dried and fragile in the chipped cup. She touched one petal. Dallas waited by the door in his black hat. You don't have to do this, he said. Yes, she answered. I do. The ride to Mercy Crossing felt longer than the first. The snow along the road had begun to melt, leaving black mud and shining puddles. Church bells rang as they entered town. People turned before the wagon stopped. News had gone ahead of them. It always did. Luther Bell stood near the church steps beside Reverend Pike. Silas Greer was there, too, broad-shouldered, silver-haired, wearing a wolfskin coat and a smile that did not reach his eyes. Mabel stepped down before Dallas could help her, not because she rejected his hand, but because the town had last seen her helpless on a platform. She wanted them to see her feet meet the ground. Dallas came beside her. Tommy took her other side. A murmur passed through the crowd. Mrs. Pike looked startled by the sight of the boy. Mr. Whitcomb removed his hat slowly. The station master, standing near the back, would not meet Mabel's eyes. Reverend Pike lifted his Bible. Miss Pierce, this is not the place for disturbance. Mabel's hands trembled around the letters. Dallas did not touch her, but his presence steadied the air. No, she said. This is the place where you intended to speak of me, without letting me answer. I have come to answer. Luther laughed. Answer what? That you chased a husband who changed his mind. Mabel untied the ribbon. No, that your brother wrote to me for 3 months, asked me to marry him, accepted $12 for a false land matter, and sent you to shame me into silence when he found better profit elsewhere. The crowd stirred. Luther's face darkened. Those are private letters. They stop being private when you read one aloud at the depot. Dallas glanced at him. Poor choice, that. Mabel handed the letters to Reverend Pike. Read them. The Reverend hesitated. Mrs. Pike stepped forward. I will. She took the letters and read enough. Not all, but enough for the crowd to hear Jonah Bell's promises, his requests, his mention of money, his assurance that Mabel would have a home and honorable welcome. The murmurs changed. Luther looked towards Silas Greer, but Greer only watched Dallas. When Mrs. Pike finished, the silence was heavy. Mabel faced Luther. I am not asking Jonah Bell to marry me. I would not cross the street for such a man now, but I will not carry shame that belongs to him. For the first time, Luther had no ready words. Then Silas Greer stepped in, smooth as oil, fine speech. But it doesn't change the fact that Osborne has kept an unmarried woman in his house for a week while owing debts he cannot pay. Folks might wonder if this little performance is meant to distract from a mortgage due. Dallas' face hardened. Mabel looked at Greer. You are the man who wants Ash Hollow. I am the man who holds a legal note. You are the man who encouraged Caleb Osborne to borrow against land that was not cleanly his to pledge. Greer's smile faded. Dallas turned to her slightly. Mabel. She took from her reticule a folded paper. I found the accounts, she said. I also found an old deed copy in the pantry wall when I cleaned behind the shelves. The north pasture was left by Dallas's mother to Dallas alone, not to his brother. Caleb had no right to pledge it. The debt might stand against cattle and house repairs, but not that pasture. Greer's eyes narrowed. You think a woman from Ohio reads deeds now? My father was a doctor, Mabel said. He was also paid in contracts by men who thought his daughter could not understand ink. A ripple moved through the crowd. This one was different. Not pity, not laughter. Respect, perhaps, beginning reluctantly. Dallas stared at her, stunned. Mabel handed the deed copy to Mr. Whitcomb. You keep town records when the clerk is absent, don't you? Whitcomb took it, adjusted his spectacles, and read. His expression changed line by line. She's right, he said. Greer's smile vanished completely. Reverend Pike lowered his Bible. Dallas took a step toward Greer. Mabel feared violence, but his voice remained steady. I'll pay what I owe on the house and cattle, Dallas said. Every cent. But you won't take my mother's pasture by my brother's fraud. Greer looked around and saw the town watching him now. That was the thing about public shame. It could turn. He pointed at Mabel. This woman is trouble. Dallas answered, no. She is the first honest accounting this town has heard in years. The weeks after that Sunday did not turn easy. True endings never come from one speech and one bright morning. Silas Greer did not forgive. Luther Bell left Mercy Crossing before Christmas, claiming business in Denver, though folks said he went to warn Jonah that his letters had grown teeth. Reverend Pike preached a sermon about humility and truth the following week, carefully avoiding names. Mrs. Pike came to Ash Hollow with a basket of preserved plums and an apology folded inside a handkerchief. Mabel accepted the plums. The apology took longer. Dallas hired 2 men for winter work after Mr. Whitcomb helped correct the mortgage papers. The debt remained, but the north pasture was safe. A small hidden fortune it was not in gold or bank notes, but in land kept from theft, in grass that would feed cattle come spring, in a future no longer sliding from beneath their boots. Mabel made that future visible 1 room at a time. She washed smoke from walls. She sewed curtains from plain muslin. She taught Tommy his letters each evening at the kitchen table. She learned which horse bit and which cow kicked. She kept accounts in a firm hand and stretched flour without making meals feel poor. Dallas healed because she allowed no other outcome. He complained once. She looked at him over the rim of the coffee pot. You might argue when you can change your own bandage without turning pale. Tommy laughed so hard he spilled milk. The sound filled the kitchen like something the house had been waiting years to hear. Yet Mabel did not mistake usefulness for belonging. Some nights, after Dallas and Tommy slept, she stood in the small room with her trunk open and wondered what she was becoming. Not Jonah Bell's bride, not merely Dallas Osborne's housekeeper, not a charity woman, not a scandal hidden behind ranch walls, but what? The answer frightened her because it had begun to wear Dallas's face. He never rushed her. That was the hardest kindness of all. He offered his coat when the wind cut sharp. He brought her a smooth-handled kitchen knife from town because the old one hurt her palm. He stood back when she entered rooms, letting her choose where to sit. When men came to the ranch, he introduced her as Miss Pierce, who keeps Ash Hollow from falling into foolishness, and said it with such solemn pride that no one laughed. On Christmas Eve, the town held a gathering in the church hall. Mabel had not intended to go. Then Tommy appeared in the kitchen wearing his patched coat and a desperate expression. "They'll have cider," he said. Dallas, standing behind him, added, "and singing." Tommy made a face. "Mostly cider." Mabel looked from one to the other. "Is this an invitation or an ambush?" "Invitation," Dallas said. "Ambush," Tommy admitted. So she went. Mercy Crossing looked gentler under snow and lantern light. The depot platform where she had been humiliated stood quiet across from the church, its boards silver with frost. Mabel looked at it as they passed. Dallas slowed. "You all right?" She watched her breath cloud in the air. "Yes," she said, surprised to mean it. Inside the church hall, conversations dipped when she entered, then rose again. Not all hearts had changed. Some never did. But Mrs. Pike came forward and took Mabel's hands. Mr. Whitcomb asked if she might look over his niece's arithmetic lessons sometime. The station master brought a cup of cider and said, awkwardly, "Miss Pierce, I should have stopped him reading that letter." Mabel looked at the man who had watched her shame and chosen silence. "Yes," she said, "you should have." His face reddened. Then she accepted the cider. Forgiveness, she was learning, did not require pretending harm had not happened. Later, when the singing began, Dallas stood near the back wall, with Tommy half asleep against his side. Mabel watched them from across the room. Dallas had trimmed his beard. His black hat hung in one hand. The scar near his jaw showed pale in the lantern glow. He looked less like a wounded man now, but not untouched by life. Never that. Luther Bell's old friends avoided him. Silas Greer did not attend. Reverend Pike nodded to Mabel from the pulpit, and though it was stiff, it was public. After the final hymn, Dallas asked if she would walk outside. The night was cold enough to make the stars sharp. Snow creaked under their boots. From the hall came fiddle music, low laughter, Tommy's voice insisting he was not tired. Dallas and Mabel walked to the edge of the depot platform. Her trunk was no longer there, yet she could see it as clearly as if memory had left a shadow. The battered corners, the wilted flowers, the woman standing alone while a town decided what she was worth. Dallas stopped beside the platform steps. "I came into town for supplies that day," he said. "I remember coffee, flour, nails, and pans of glass. And pans of glass." He looked down at his hat. "I had a list. Thought I knew what I needed." Mabel's heart began to beat harder. He turned toward her. "I did not plan to bring anyone home. I did not plan to need anyone. I had made a life out of not needing, because needing had cost too much." She said nothing. The prairie wind moved between the buildings and lifted a loose strand of hair against her cheek. Dallas reached into his coat and took out something wrapped in cloth. "I made this poor," he said, "so don't praise it too highly." She unwrapped it. Inside lay a small wooden box, sanded smooth, its lid carved with two simple daisies. Mabel's breath caught. "For your letters," he said, "or your mother's Bible, or anything you want kept safe." Her fingers moved over the carved flowers. "Dallas, I know a box isn't a home." "No," she whispered, "but wanting to keep someone's things safe is a beginning." He looked at her then, fully, with all his guardedness laid down. "Mabel Pierce, I cannot offer you ease. Ash Hollow still has debt. Winters still come hard. I am stubborn, and you have noticed. There is a boy in my kitchen who will likely put frogs in your sewing basket come spring. I have scars, a name folks once doubted, and a house that still smells of smoke when it rains." Her eyes filled. "But if you stay," he said, voice roughening, "it will not be because no one else wanted you. It will be because I do, not as charity, not as convenience, not as a woman I found at a depot and pitied. I want you as my wife. If you can come to that wanting in your own time." Mabel held the box close. The first tear fell quietly. It did not shame her. "You once told Tommy forever is built one honest night at a time," Dallas said. "I am asking for the right to build honestly." Behind them, the church doors opened. A few people stepped out into the cold. then paused when they saw Dallas and Mabel by the platform. The old fear touched her for a heartbeat. Public eyes, public judgment, the wound of being seen and found lacking. Dallas saw it. He stepped back, not away, but enough to give her room. Mabel looked at the town, at Mrs. Pike in the doorway, at the station master under the lamp, at Mr. Whitcomb holding Tommy's shoulder as the boy peered out with wide eyes. Then she looked at Dallas. "I came here to be chosen by a man who did not know me," she said. "I was ashamed when he refused, but now I think the shame would have been marrying where I had to beg for kindness." Dallas's eyes shone in the lantern light. She took his hand. "I know you," she said. "I know how you speak to frightened animals. I know how you stand for a woman before knowing whether she will stay. I know you buy blue thread and pretend it is business. I know you love that boy like blood, though no paper requires it. I know you bleed rather than surrender what was left in your care." She smiled through tears. "And I know I am tired of leaving." Dallas's breath left him slowly, like a man setting down a burden carried too many miles. "I asked that, yes," Tommy called from the church door. The whole town heard him. Mabel laughed once, soft and trembling. Dallas turned. "Tommy, well, is it?" Mabel looked at the boy, who had once asked if trunks meant leaving. "It is, yes," she said. Tommy ran across the snow and crashed into them both. Dallas caught him with one arm and Mabel with the other, and for a moment the three of them stood at the foot of the depot platform, where humiliation had once begun. No one laughed now. No one read a letter. No one asked why she had been unwanted. On New Year's Day, beneath church bells and a pale winter sun, Mabel Pierce Mary Dallas Osborne in Mercy Crossing. She wore a dress of plain muslin sewn with blue thread. Mrs. Pike pinned fresh white daisies at her collar, grown in the church window box and coaxed early with kitchen warmth. Tommy stood beside Dallas with his hair combed flat and his boots polished unevenly. When Reverend Pike asked who gave the bride, silence filled the church. Mabel lifted her chin. "I give myself." Dallas' eyes never left her face. Afterward, they did not hold a grand feast. There was coffee, cider, bread, stew, and peach preserves from the jar Mabel had found in the Ash Hollow cupboard. Men who had mocked her at the depot came awkwardly to shake Dallas's hand. Women who had whispered behind gloves asked Mabel about her stitching. Some apologies came clear, some came sideways. She took only what was honest and let the rest pass like dust. That evening, Dallas drove the wagon home under a sky streaked rose and gold. Mabel sat beside him, wrapped in his coat though she now had her own. Tommy slept in the wagon bed against her trunk, one hand resting on it, as if making sure it came home too. Ash Hollow waited with lamplight in the kitchen window. Dallas stopped the wagon before the porch. For a moment, none of them moved. The house no longer looked like a place merely surviving fire. Smoke scars remained under the eaves, and the barn still leaned, and winter still lay hard across the land. But curtains glowed in the windows. Wood smoke rose straight into the cold. A path had been swept to the door. Home was not a perfect place. It was a place where work and love kept answering ruin. Dallas helped Mabel down. This time she accepted his hand without fear of what anyone might think. Together, they carried her trunk inside and set it at the foot of the bed, in the room that was no longer only hers, and not yet only his, but theirs by promise and patience. Tommy stumbled in half asleep. "Are you leaving that trunk packed?" Mabel knelt and opened the lid. One by one, she took things out. Her mother's Bible, the folded letters she no longer feared, the carved daisy box, the blue thread, and the dried flowers from the depot. She placed the flowers on the mantel, not as a sorrow, but as proof. "I am unpacking," she said. Tommy smiled and leaned against Dallas. Dallas looked at Mabel across the warm kitchen, across the lamplight, across all the miles that had brought her, unwanted, to a town that did not know her worth. Outside, the prairie wind moved over the snow. Somewhere far off, a train whistle cried into the dark. carrying other travelers toward other wounds, other chances, other doors. Inside Ash Hollow, Mabel Pierce set supper on the table while Dallas Osborne hung his black hat by the door. The wounded cowboy who had ridden into town for supplies had come home with the lonely bride no one wanted. And by Winter's quiet mercy, she had become the heart of every room.